Today, as promised, I'm going to be talking about the wrestling legend himself, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, one of the most beloved and colorful characters in the history of professional wrestling. He was one that I liked as a kid, definitely, and was always massively over with the WWF audience, at least back when I was watching. And I decided to do a top 10 match list for Hacksaw because of an interesting little tidbit with him. Like I said, he was always massively over with the audience, it seemed, at various points of his career, not just in WWF. He was also mad over in Mid-South. He was mad over in WCW at points. Hacksaw Jim Duggan always seemed to be a well-liked wrestler from the wrestling audience. But when I first got on the internet, one of the things I noticed was that certain guys were not well liked by the star rating giving community, shall we say. And Hacksaw was one of the big ones that they would go after, saying he's too limited, his matches suck, he doesn't do much, he's got 3 moves and all this other stuff. He's just a cartoon character, and it's just a shtick, and that's it. And that was one of those moments where I kind of realized my thought process on things was maybe a little different from a lot of the people that give their opinions online. Not saying that I'm right and they're wrong or vice versa. It's just the nature of how everything goes. And I feel like a variety of opinion is a good thing. But the main reason I decided to tackle a top 10 list for Hacksaw Jim Duggan's matches is I like a challenge. And to all the people that say that Hacksaw Jim Duggan sucks and that his matches were never any good, my comments against that, there's a few things. One, it wasn't Hacksaw's job, especially during his big run in the WWF. It wasn't his job to have really good matches. Hacksaw's not the type of guy that you throw out there for 20 minutes and have his catch-as-catch-can match. That's just not what he was there for. Hacksaw was typically a popcorn match, filler match type of guy who was really over and was just there to kind of lighten things up for the crowd, give the crowd somebody a reason to pop, not give them this big climactic battle, but give them something to feel happy about, then move on to the next thing, which is probably much bigger and has more of a build-up behind it. Going through a lot of Hacksaw's WWF pay-per-views, he never really had like a major grudge match on a pay-per-view, not with the WWF anyway. And that's really weird when you consider how over Hacksaw was and how every kid had the friggin' foam 2x4s and everything. And it's very strange to consider that he never really had a major grudge match on pay-per-view. Not really. And even looking at his WrestleMania matches, for somebody who's over as Hacksaw, never really had a big WrestleMania storyline. I think probably the biggest match he had at WrestleMania was the tournament match he had with Ted DiBiase at WrestleMania 4. And that was just a stepping stone for DiBiase more than anything else. When people say he never really had good matches, it's like, well, he wasn't really designed to have good matches most of the time. He was typically designed to be a filler match type of guy. And also, being a more lighthearted comedy character, people say he's limited. Again, it's kind of what I've always said about Hogan or even the Bushwhackers. The Bushwhackers would probably be a better example of this, where people just kind of judge them based on their run in the WWF. And it's like, guys, if you watch Hacksaw in the NWA, he was a hell of a brawler. Like, that dude could have, like, a knockdown, drag-out fight. Like, a really awesome, violent fight. With a lot of heat and a lot of crowd investment as well. And he could just go out there and make it look like he was in a Pier 6 brawl. And his stuff in Mid-South is great, if you've ever seen it. Thank God I've been able to track down a lot of that stuff and see it. So it's like very much like watching Hogan's work in Japan, and like I mentioned with the Bushwhackers, everybody kind of thinks of them as this goofball tag team act that made the kids happy, but people seem to forget that they were the sheep herders, who were violent savages that probably would have fit in with ECW if given the chance. Bloodthirsty monsters they were. I don't know where Vince got the idea to take these guys and make them into goofball baby faces, but it worked, because they got over too, so who am I to argue? So there's that. So the people that judge Hacksaw based on his WWF run and then later on his WCW run, it's like you didn't see all of Hacksaw's career. And again, it's like watching Hogan in Japan or watching Andre in the 70s when everybody kind of thinks of him as late 80s Andre where he can barely move. If you watch him in the 70s or even like the early to mid 80s, like Andre was doing some crazy shit in the ring. I watched him have a steel cage match with Big John Studd. And the finish of the match was Andre jumping off the top rope and coming down with a sit-down splash on top of Studd. I don't care if I was as big as Big John Studd or not. There's no way in hell I would ever take that move. So, Big John Studd is a much braver man than I am. But in any case, so there's that aspect to Hacksaw that I think needs to be highlighted. And also, another thing that I've always credited Hacksaw for is that he was so over with the crowd and he was so beloved that one valuable aspect that the Hacksaw Jim Duggan character had is that if you were trying to get a heel over, what's a good way for them to get heat? You have them beat up Hacksaw. One major example that sticks out in my mind is on the episode of the main event, right before WrestleMania 7, Sergeant Slaughter beat up on Hacksaw, which set the stage for Hogan to do a run-in and then Slaughter to beat down on him, too. So, the fans love Hacksaw so much that it's a good way to get a top heel over, just have him beat up Hacksaw, and the crowd will hate him. And even later in his career, I found this match, and I did not see it when it first aired because I wasn't watching WCW at this point. But I watched a Nitro match between Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Goldberg, and I actually really liked how the match was booked. Goldberg had just turned heel, which, as most of us know, was a mistake and should have never happened, and was horribly executed anyway. But in this one moment, it's like, okay, they're trying to get Goldberg over as a heel. They basically have him destroy Hacksaw and attack his kidneys after Hacksaw had returned from cancer. And it's like, oh my god, what a dickhead Goldberg is. And Goldberg pretty much destroyed him. And it was like, oh man, that actually was effectively booked. And, you have to really dig through some crap to find effective booking in WCW circa 2000. So, yeah, I thought that match was very interesting, worth calling out, and worth highlighting my point of how Hacksaw was valuable as a beloved babyface and that he could be used as a tool to get heels over. And there's actually one example on this list that definitely highlights that perfectly. But yeah, so I really went through Hacksaw's entire career and picked out 10 matches that I really enjoyed from his. And I just wanted to come up here and talk about it because Hacksaw is one of those guys, again, doesn't get talked about a lot as far as great matches go. But I wanted to come on here and say that there were Hacksaw matches that I did enjoy, and I have no issue highlighting them here. And how many other channels are going to give you a top 10 match list for Hacksaw Jim Duggan? I like being unique. And again, I like a challenge too. So here we go. Here are my top 10 picks for my favorite matches in Hacksaw Jim Duggan's career. Number 10, his Intercontinental title match with Shawn Michaels on the May 3rd, 1993 episode of Monday Night Raw. This was Shawn right at, just waiting to break out. He was the IC champion at this point. He wasn't quite a finished product yet, but the signs of greatness were there. And what we got here was one of the moments from the first year of Raw that I still remember to this day as being a really cool thing. And I rewatched it again in preparation for this video, and it still worked for me, where Shawn Michaels got himself intentionally disqualified, and Hacksaw sat in a chair and basically took over the show, which, 1998, 99, 2000, that type of stuff was commonplace, but 93, that was like, oh my god, Hacksaw's he's having a sit-down protest in the middle of the show, and he wants another shot at Shawn Michaels. So that was a really cool thing for the first year of Monday Night Raw, in a time where they weren't always doing really cool things. They were still trying to find themselves in how to do a live weekly show and kind of that, not quite Crash TV yet, but kind of that trying to find that energized energy that Raw became known for later in the decade. And this was one of the earliest examples of that. I would also put the 1-2-3 Kids upset over Razor Ramon up there as one of those as well. And I thought the match was pretty good, and the ending was really good. It set up a nice angle. It set up a rematch down the road. More on that later. Number 9, my favorite Hacksaw Jim Duggan WWF pay-per-view match. He tagged with Demolition in a 6-man tag against Andre the Giant and the Twin Towers at SummerSlam 1989, which is probably, by default, Hacksaw's biggest WWF pay-per-view match, unless you count, I don't know, couple of the Survivor Series matches he was a part of, in '87, and he was on Hogan's team in 1990. But like I said, for the most part, Duggan didn't have really big pay-per-view matches. But here he's working with Andre, so immediately that feels like a big attraction. And here it's all right, so you've got Andre and the Twin Towers, 3 big, huge super heavyweights. So it's oh my god, how are Demolition and Hacksaw going to beat these guys? And Demolition and Hacksaw are these 3 really roughneck brawler guys up against these super heavyweights. So they really just had to try and beat them down. And I remember Duggan was doing the king gimmick at this point, so he had the crown and everything. And because he was working Demolition, he had face paint, and he had the American flag face painted on his face, and that's one of the more charming aspects that Duggan's character, his almost childlike love of America, is so like infectious and cute that it's impossible not to like the guy. So when I saw as a kid, when I saw the USA face paint, I'm like, how can you not love Duggan? He's such a he's got a 2x4 with a crown on it, a crown on himself. And he's got face paint on. How many gimmicks can one guy have for one match? But I really enjoyed this. I went back and rewatched it recently, and I was like, wow, this is actually a pretty solid match. And pretty effectively booked. I think it was booked to work around Andre's limitations. And to that end, it worked. I'd heard that originally it was supposed to be Big John Studd teaming with Demolition against Andre in the Towers. So I think Duggan was actually a better option at this point, because Big John Studd as a face was always weird to me. But in any case, it's a very unique blending of characters with Andre, Big Boss Man, Demolition, one of my favorite tag teams of the era, and Duggan all in the ring together. And it's like, wow, this is actually a pretty cool match, and I kind of dug it. I dug Duggan in this match too. So fun stuff all around. Good match. The faces got the win. They cheated to win, which sure. But in any case, I thought this was an enjoyable match. Number 8, this is a match I was referencing earlier. The Knockdown Challenge from the February 6th, 1993 episode of WWF Superstars, Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Yokozuna. Now, what I talked about earlier with Hacksaw being an effective tool to get heels over, this is probably the best example of that, where basically this match, it's not even really a match. I wasn't even sure if it counted, but I'm counting it anyway. Because I remember it so vividly, even to this day. And so Hacksaw said he could knock down Yokozuna. So basically the entire match is Hacksaw clotheslining Yokozuna, and he tries it once, twice, and then I think on the third time Yoko finally goes down. And the crowd pops, Duggan's celebrating, it's like, oh my god, the face just beat Yokozuna. Yokozuna doesn't like this, beats the ever-living crap out of Hacksaw, and then gives him the bonsai drop multiple times. Duggan starts to cough up blood. They do that gimmick. And by the end of it, you think, oh my god, Yoko's just lost his heat. And he gained it right back tenfold, just beating up on Duggan the way he did and injuring him, preventing Duggan from participating at WrestleMania 9. And, Duggan had to be stretchered out of the arena. And I thought this was a very effective segment and did a lot to make Yokozuna into the monster that he needed to be heading into WrestleMania and eventually working with Hogan and Undertaker and guys like that. I think Duggan was a great, first major victim. I guess you could say, Virgil was his first victim since they worked him at Survivor Series, and Savage was kind of a victim because Savage was the last one eliminated at the Rumble. But really, this was the first time where Yoko looked like he'd beaten up somebody of real consequence. And it was like, oh my god, this guy, you don't mess with Yokozuna. And I thought this was all effectively booked. I thought it was, the psychology here was very well done, because it's like you had the crowd invested in nothing but clotheslines, and they went nuts for it. It's like, God, to have those simpler times back. But I thought this was awesome, and I thought, not many baby faces could have pulled this off as effectively as Hacksaw, just by virtue of the fact that he was so well liked. I don't think it would have worked as well with too many other guys. Not only that he was so well liked, he had the right level of likability, but also vulnerability. Like, Undertaker can't do something like this. Savage probably couldn't do something like this, but Duggan can do this. And I think, it's one of my more favorite memories of watching WWF Superstars, watching one of my babyface, one of the guys I like getting beat up horribly. It's one of those things that's born into my skull. And I put this up there, personally, when I think back on childhood memories of WWF Superstars. Everybody remembers the Jake Roberts, Randy Savage snakebite incident, which they should. It's awesome. And everybody remembers the barbershop window incident, which they should. It's awesome, with the rocker split. But I put this up there with it. Maybe not as high as those, but certainly not too many notches behind that. And again, it's all because of how effectively booked it was. Alright, number 7. We're going outside of WWF now. We're going into Mid-South, 1983. Hacksaw Jim Duggan's matches with Butch Reed, the Battle of the Hacksaws. It's so funny, I just watched seasons 2 and 3 of Glow, and on one part they talk about the battle of the gimmicks with Junk Chain versus Junk Chain, and that's basically what you get here with Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Who's the true Hacksaw? And I think that's such a simple and easy thing to get behind. Guys fighting over a name. And even later in the 1990s, there was like the DX split, and I remember they did that pay-per-view match. It was Billy Gunn and Chyna versus X-Pac and Road Dogg, who gets to keep the DX name. And it's an easy thing to get behind. It's an easy story to write. Who's the true gimmick? Who has the real gimmick? And it's one of those like simple things that's easy to do, but it typically works. And if you watch the Mid-South Duggan and Butch Reed matches, they are really, really good, and the crowd is fully invested in them. They love Hacksaw, obviously, and I saw one match that they had that went a little long, was more of a long traditional match. I saw another match they had that's on the WWE Network, I believe, on one of the episodes of Mid-South, and it's a really good, like, solid 5-6 minute TV match where it's clearly the thing that the audience was the most invested in the entire episode. So I'm putting all the Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Hacksaw Butch Reed matches on here because it was a good feud, yielded great results, and obviously the audience was really invested in it. And really one of those like hidden gems from the Mid-South library, I think. Next up is another Mid-South match, and kind of a point of evidence of Hacksaw Jim Duggan was capable of having great brawls. From December 27th, 1985, a Mid-South event, Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Buzz Sawyer in a dog collar match. And if you've ever seen the Roddy Piper, Greg Valentine dog collar match or any other matches like it, you pretty much know what to expect out of this. They're just going to go out there, beat the shit out of each other with a chain while chained to each other with dog collars. And it is what it is. It's a violent brawl, an awesome violent brawl for its time especially. And one that I highly recommend looking up and checking out. I don't think it's on the network. I had to scour online and find it, but I really enjoyed it when I saw it. I was like, man, that was a fight. Like, that one was absolutely a fight. And again, just points to, everybody that says Hacksaw Jim Duggan's limited, look at this match. It's like he could get down and brawl with the best of them, and this is probably one of the best examples of that. All right, then our next two items on the list are coming from Saturday night's main event. Now, as you know, last year I did the Saturday night's main events and Clash of Champions live streams, and there were two Hacksaw Jim Duggan matches on those Saturday night's main events that I really enjoyed, and I was like, wow, these are like some of the best Duggan matches I've ever seen. You can go back and watch those live streams and judge my reactions to them for yourself. But first up at number 5, we've got Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Rick Rude for the Intercontinental title from Saturday night's main event 21. And just a really good match. And it's an odd pairing because you never really saw Rick Rude work with Duggan all that much. And they were around at the same time and constantly on TV, so you would have thought they would have crossed paths. And it's actually kind of a natural feud to do because Rude is the epitome of the perfect body, great looks, all of that stuff. And Duggan is the everyman character. He's like the epitome of the everyman character, him and Dusty Rhodes. So it would have been a perfect feud to have, I would have thought. Rude's more of a traditional in-ring wrestler. Duggan's more of a brawler. I think that opposites attract there would have been really good, and I'm a little surprised they never did that feud. But in any case, we did get this match, and I thought it was pretty damn good. And it was the opening match of that Saturday night's main event, so if you want to watch it, check it out on the network. I think it's really good. And the other match on there was the Battle of the Kings. Randy Macho Man Savage had taken the crown from Jim Duggan and become Macho King Randy Savage. So this was Hacksaw Jim Duggan's chance at revenge. So we had Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Randy Savage on Saturday night's main event 25. This was a really good match. Like, really, really friggin' good match. Arguably Duggan's best in the WWF. And granted, he's working with Randy Savage, but when you're a character that's as beloved as Duggan, that certainly helps as well in getting the crowd invested in what you're doing. And this is also a match that really showed how much Sherry added to Randy Savage's whole act. The two worked beautifully together. Excellent match, great stuff. Probably the best match on that episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the same one that also had Hogan and Warrior versus Mr. Perfect and the Genius, which was the major attraction, but I think as far as like what I enjoyed the most, I think the Duggan Savage match was more enjoyable, probably. And I like the tag match because it set up the WrestleMania 6 main event beautifully, but And I really like that Duggan Savage match. I was really surprised at how good it was. But next up is my pick for Duggan's best match in the WWF. I had referenced his Raw May 3rd match from '93 with Shawn Michaels. Here is the rematch. Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental title in a lumberjack match the very next week on Raw, May 10th, 1993. Now, if you've heard me talk about lumberjack matches in the past, you know I do not like lumberjack matches. I'm not a fan of the gimmick. I think it's ridiculous that all faces are on one side and all heels are on one side, and like the motivations of all the individual personalities doesn't make any sense. This might be the best lumberjack match I've ever seen, and take that for what it's worth. It's a match that included Hacksaw Jim Duggan, but one of the things that made it work, not only the angle the week before that set it up beautifully, and now Shawn's in a situation where he can't run away from Duggan in a lumberjack match, but also those two were embroiled in individual situations that played itself into the match. Yokozuna was one of the lumberjacks. He has a history with Duggan. I talked about the knockdown challenge, and he ultimately cost Duggan the match. Mr. Perfect was feuding with Shawn Michaels, and they were being set up for an IC title match later in the year at SummerSlam. Mr. Perfect had a reason to go after Shawn in this match. So there was like a lot more like nuance and actually like good character work involved here in keeping their storylines moving forward, referencing the past, and while focusing on the present by delivering a climax to this Duggan-Shawn issue that had been set up the week before. This is also the one where Shawn came out on crutches because he didn't want to have the match. Duggan didn't believe him and beat him up. All that great stuff. And an early example of how great Shawn could be as a character and like this weasel shit heel. All of that was effectively done. And the match, I thought, played out beautifully. I thought it was a really good match. I dare say one of the best matches of the first year of Monday Night Raw. Probably the best. It's up there, and like I said, I already said it's probably my favorite lumberjack match of all time. My only real issue is that Shawn beat Duggan by DQ, and I think it would have been more effective if Shawn had just beat him and, like, you know, pinned him. And yeah, Shawn still wins, but it's like, DQ, you know. But my preference would have been for Shawn to pin him. And by whatever weasel means, I mean, Yokozuna already beat up Hacksaw, and that would have been enough for me. But it's, other than that, I thought the match was really effectively done. And again, giving it a rewatch, I thought it was a lot of fun because, again, it's like what I talked about between Rude and Duggan, where Shawn's like the pretty boy and the athlete and the traditional wrestler and the high flyer, and Duggan's like this grounded pound, I'm going to beat the shit out of you, everyman babyface. So I think the two actually had really good chemistry together. And you wouldn't, like, that's a pairing that just sounds so off the wall, especially today given how Shawn's career played out and his legacy has grown. But you wouldn't think like Shawn Michaels and Hacksaw Jim Duggan would be that natural of a pairing, but again, I think the differences in characters and the differences of styles, and the way they set up the match the week before with this great angle, I think it was one of those, like, it just made magic, and I think it's a really good match and one of those hidden gems in the history of Monday Night Raw that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I still remember it to this day. And I really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for something to watch on the network, I highly recommend checking out the May 10th episode. Actually, watch the first match on May 3rd, 1993, and then watch the May 10th episode to get the payoff to it. And I think it's some really good, underrated moments from the early days of Monday Night Raw, and definitely worth checking out. But next up, we have my favorite Hacksaw Jim Duggan WCW match from Starrcade 1994, a show that is not remembered fondly, mainly because of the main event of Hogan versus the Butcher. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was in the opening match where he defended the United States title against Big Van Vader. This match is awesome. I swear to God, this match is awesome because you get Vader being Vader and you get Duggan being Duggan, and they just beat the shit out of each other. It's I was blown away. Giving it a rewatch, I was blown away by how good it was. Because again, you wouldn't. That's a case where I wouldn't expect Vader and Duggan to mesh that well, especially Duggan at that stage of his career. But they just went out there and just threw punches, power slammed each other, did all sorts of shit, and it made for by far the best match on Starrcade 94, in my opinion. And it was the opening match, and again, you were looking for a hidden gem. I thought that match was great, and a nice showcase for Vader, and a nice showcase for that even at that stage of his career, Duggan still had it. And when called upon, he could have that really great pay-per-view match. So I will say it is the best pay-per-view match of Jim Duggan's career for sure. I loved it, especially on this rewatch. It was like even better than I remembered it. And Vader got the win, obviously, because he was going to be set up to face Hogan in '95. But well, whatever. But in any case, I thought this was really, really good. And again, if you're looking for a hidden gem on the network, check out Starrcade '94. It's the first match. You don't have to wait long for it. Duggan versus Vader was awesome. I highly recommend checking it out. But my number one favorite Hacksaw Jim Duggan match of all time. And it's a match that's gotten talked about more and more in some recent years, but I see it come up more in discussion now, but it was kind of a hidden gem for a while. From March 22nd, 1985, so just 2 days after I was born, if that date's correct. 2 days after I was born, this match took place. Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Ted DiBiase in a loser leaves steel cage tuxedo coal miner's glove match. Now, that match sounds like Vince Russo's wet dream because it's just gimmick on top of gimmick on top of gimmick on top of gimmick. And by all rights, this match should be terrible. You have the stipulation of loser leaves. You have a steel cage. You have both men wearing tuxedos for some reason. Although I do like the nuance of Duggan wearing the white tuxedo and DiBiase wearing the black tuxedo, so you know who the good guy and the bad guy is. It's like, come on, that's great. But and you have a pole with coal miner's glove where you can get the glove and smack your opponent with it. By all rights, this should be terrible because it's just too many gimmicks. It just looks like a three-ring circus, and it just gets ridiculous after a while. You would expect anyway. Because I've seen matches that get over-gimmicked. I've watched TNA. I've seen matches that have been over-gimmicked, and it just looks silly after a while. But I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was just the talent of both guys. I don't know if it was the fans being super invested in the feud. I don't know if it was the gimmicks maybe being the right gimmicks that complemented each other. I don't know. But this match is amazing, and it's totally worth watching. It is a violent bloodbath, where both guys just beat the shit out of each other. And I think, and I've highly recommended a lot of these matches on this list, but if you're going to watch any match on this list, I highly recommend checking this one out because I think it's one of the best matches of both. It's my favorite Duggan match. It's one of my favorite DiBiase matches. And I think it's absolutely worth checking out, especially if you're curious about that era, if you're curious about the territories and what the different territories were like. That match is totally a Mid-South match, and one of the defining matches of that promotion, in my opinion. And definitely worth checking out. It's not on the network as far as I know, but you can definitely find it online. I found it, just one quick Google search, I found it online. It's not that hard. Absolutely, I recommend checking it out. It's great. It's one of the biggest surprise hits I've ever had, because again, you look at that list of gimmicks, and it's like, this looks like a clown show, but my God, does it work. It works beautifully. So even when he has the situation working against him, because by all rights, this shouldn't have worked, by just being too over-gimmicked. And even in those days, I've seen matches that were over-gimmicked that didn't work. There was that Tower of Doom match that WCW, or like Crockett did, that just didn't work. It was too silly. But this match absolutely worked, and is really, really good. And again, if there's any match on this list that I highly recommend, I mean, obviously, I think the top three, it's like, all right, check out the DiBiase match, check out the Vader match, and definitely check out the Shawn match from Raw 93. Those are the ones that absolutely you should go out of your way to see. And, proof that Hacksaw Jim Duggan, for all the complaints that he was limited and all the complaints that he wasn't that good, it's like, Duggan had his moments, and he had his matches, and that's what this video is all about. I just want to make sure that the best of Hacksaw Jim Duggan's career got highlighted. And, so it was fun. This was fun. I enjoyed this, getting to talk about somebody who doesn't always get talked about as far as great matches go. But again, that's part of the challenge and part of the fun of doing a video like this. But that is all I have for you now. I'll have more videos lined up for you this week. I've got another Star Wars review, and possibly the beginning of my next live stream series. We shall see. I'll keep you posted on that. But that is all I have for you now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all later.